Article 8. Mr. LeBeau?
Mr. Moderator, it's a petition article.
Petition, sorry, thank you for reminding me. Mr. LeBeau reminded me Article 8 is our citizens petition article. Mr. Moss, are you in the audience? I understand you're going to make the motion on behalf of the petitioner. Is there a second? Okay, the printed motion under Article 8 has been moved and seconded. This is a petition article brought by Mr. Ramesh Razdan and several other individuals that the town vote to adopt a new polystyrene reduction bylaw. Mr. Razdan, would you and your co-presenters please come forward, and if you would introduce your co-presenters, and please remember to adhere to the time limits tonight. Thank you.
Can you pull the slides?
I'm sorry, Finance Committee recommendation, Mr. Pitney.
Finance Committee recommends Article 8 by a vote of 7-1.
Thank you.
Supposed to go? Last time we broke all the rules. Good evening, town meeting members. My name is Ramesh Razdan, and I am a resident at 94 Stony Hill Road in Precinct 9. Thanks for giving us one more opportunity. We were here in the heated debate last time around. What we did after the last town meeting is we did an extensive amount of research. We worked with Board of Health, and all the feedback that they had given us, we incorporated that in our new bylaw. Over the summer, we put that bylaw back, and I'm actually happy to report that Board of Health as well as Board of Selectmen have unanimously accepted it and recommended it forward. As you heard from Finance Committee also, they recommended it by 7-1. I think what we started from last time when we actually had this discussion, we have started a motion. The school department has done a lot of wonderful things, and thanks to them for doing that. They have eliminated already straws. They have also eliminated some of the go to styrofoam containers without any additional cost to our families. And so what we believe is that there's a positive movement going across Shrewsbury, and this bylaw just accelerates that further. And what I would like to do at this time is introduce our high school seniors who have actually last time walked you through the details. To my right is Rahul, Siddhant, Anish, and Anirudh. I will now hand it over to them to walk us through what they are recommending, and at the end I'll come back. We have a time limit, so let's go.
So my name is Rahul, and though it may keep our drinks warm without burning our hand, polystyrene is an extremely harmful environment. And you may ask, why? What is the problem? Well, for one, we are feeding our next generation polystyrene, and this includes a material known as styrene, which, according to the International Agency for Research on Cancer, is actually can cause multiple diseases such as leukemia, nasal cancer, and multiple more. And on top of the health risks that go with polystyrene, on top of that, we have environmental risk, and we also want to keep Shrewsbury a clean town. So as we can see over here, this is Shrewsbury High School, and we can see it's littered with polystyrene. We can also see in Dean Park and Stony Hill Road, Centec Boulevard, Municipal Street, and multiple more. So what we also have to see is that these are non-biodegradable. So The 25 billion cups are thrown away every single year, which is enough to encircle the world 436 times, which equivalates to 418 million miles. So during our presentation itself, 50,000 polystyrene cups have been gone to waste.
So Rahul mentioned some of the cancer risks and leukemia risks associated with the styrene bleeding into our food. But now let's talk about some of the environmental risks that come with styrofoam. So as you can see here, 80% of all styrofoam in the world ends up in landfills. And additionally, more importantly, 20% ends up in waterways because of all the littering that Rahul showed that goes on in communities. And this is really problematic because the styrofoam that's littered that you see like throughout Shrewsbury is actually poisoning our soil due to photodegradation. And that's super problematic for several reasons. And one issue is that not only does styrofoam cause a risk to humans, but it also harms animals as well. As you can see here, animals on land as well as sea often mistake styrofoam for food. And this is a big problem because you often see them like choking on the styrofoam, which has led like over 2 million birds on land and sea to be affected annually.
So some of you might be saying, well, what happens to the styrofoam that's actually being thrown away in the trash or recycle bin? So what actually happens is it goes into an incinerator and is burnt off. But that's not a solution at all, because the issue with that is specifically the incinerator lets off a lot of harmful chemicals into the atmosphere that not only accelerates a climate change and hurts our environment, but also increases air pollution, which harms us as well. In fact, what happens is specifically when you let off those chemicals, they go back into our food chain and eventually in the long term come back into our digestive system once we consume certain parts of the food chain. And this is not the only risk of using polystyrene. This graph specifically shows that making styrofoam in the first place requires a lot of non-renewable resources and fossil fuels that also give up like CO2, which is harmful for not only the environment, but also, again, air pollution is a big issue. As a result, what we actually have found is a lot of studies conclude that there's a lot of hidden costs, and they estimate it to be about $7 billion, which adds about 1.2 cents per every cup of styrofoam that's being used.
So now let's talk about the solution that we have before us. Here's a map of the United States. Specifically, the light blue states are ones that have major cities in them that have already passed polystyrene legislation, just like the one we have before us. The dark blue states, like Illinois and Pennsylvania, are in the process of having major cities passing these legislation. What we have to understand is that cities across the world, especially in Massachusetts, but in other states as well, are taking the initiative to start banning styrofoam. Major cities like New York, San Francisco, and Washington, D.C. have already banned polystyrene across the entirety of their city. So if these big metropolises can do it, why can't we? Specifically in Massachusetts, we've seen 29 towns have already passed very similar pieces of legislation to ban styrofoam just like we have. For example, Amherst, Andover, Brookline, and Wellfleet have all done it. My personal saying is, if Lee can do it, we can do it. So I think that if they can do it, it's time for us to take action and take our own initiative to do it.
So the common misconception is that there aren't many alternatives available. Well, clearly there are, because reusables, paper products, recyclable products are all feasible options that we can turn to. And on top of that, major corporations have already, Chipotle and McDonald's have already gone styrofoam free, and Dunkin' Donuts, which is a very prevalent force in Shrewsbury itself, has decided to go styrofoam free by 2020, and that aligns directly with our deadline for the polystyrene ban.
But then looking to smaller businesses, we see here a study by Clean Water Action, which actually shows that the average cost difference between styrofoam and alternatives for a variety of products is actually only 1 cent per unit. So as you can see, the cost from switching from styrofoam to an alternative is not that great compared to the health risks. And then let's look at what our bylaw specifically says. So as you can see in section 2, basically what it says is that food establishments are prohibited from selling styrofoam containers. And what Section 3 says is that the director decides the rules and regulations required to implement the bylaw, and that each business in Shrewsbury needs to comply with the bylaw.
So, obviously this is our second time coming around, and what we made special about this bylaw is we're addressing every single issue that was brought up in the last town meeting and making sure we have a viable option to address all of your concerns. So the first concern that a lot of people had with the bylaw last time was that they didn't like that the bylaw specifically wrote out who was supposed to enforce it. That's why we've made it much more open, a lot like the plastic bag ban, which was passed a few years back, that specifically allows the director to decide who exactly is going to be enforcing the bylaw as a whole. More importantly, this also exists for things like deferments, which would be handed out through this bylaw if someone would have an undue hardship and cannot actually afford to comply with this polystyrene ban. The second thing is that we also heard that it might be too harsh on these businesses, so we decreased the difficulty of what punishments people would get out once we handed out if they do not comply with the ban. For example, we've taken out the stipulation that people would get a food permit taken away, and we've decreased the fines to make it more compliable. And so what's really important to remember is this new part of our bylaw is emulating exactly what the plastic bag ban has been doing currently and is in effect right now and is working very, very well. So there's no reason that you should be considering that there's any legal issues with this bylaw right now. Just more into the nitty-gritty about how we're going to be enforcing it, it would be the town manager's office that would really be enforcing the specific fines and the warnings that would be handed out. And we would also rely on a citizen's reports for any violations, just like the plastic bag ban does, and with the Board of Health helping out.
The amazing thing is that Shrewsbury Public School System has already taken an amazing stand on polystyrene. In fact, as my father had said previously, it has already eliminated plastic utensils, straws, and plastic to-go containers. On top of that, other school systems in Shrewsbury, such as Alhambra, have already gone styrofoam-free, and St. John's uses extremely little polystyrene. And as prices continue, as more and more people join the movement for polystyrene, the prices of the alternatives for polystyrene will become more and more cheaper because more and more people will be going towards the alternatives.
So finally, let's talk about the area that might seem like the biggest concern, and that would be Shrewsbury businesses. The good thing is, most of those businesses don't actually have a problem. We went around and called and contacted 80 businesses in Shrewsbury, a list given to us by Shrewsbury government, and we found that 70% of them fall into one of these three categories. 50% specifically say that they're already or planning to switch to alternatives or just don't use styrofoam right now. That includes businesses like Dunkin' Donuts, who may still be using it for the next year or two, but are switching in 2020. Then 15% of them use styrofoam to some extent, but in other areas, in other cities, like for example Natick or Greenfield, have already switched away from these products. For example, KFC, which we all know uses a lot of styrofoam, in Greenfield has switched away from it, and they said it affected their cost almost nothing. Finally, 5% of them use a minimal amount of styrofoam, like St. John's for maybe 1 or 2 products, but said they are supportive of the ban because they recognize that an alternative would be easily able to be switched to. So to summarize, we would say that the results of this passing this bill would be a low economic impact, but the benefits would be a cleaner town and a healthier group of people. We would say that the health benefits and the harms that we're saving our environment from far outweigh the small costs that may happen, especially as in the long term, as Rahul mentioned, the costs are going down, and in the long term, these alternatives will only be giving us benefits without any of the harms. Shrewsbury was the 31st town and a leader in central Massachusetts to pass the plastic bag bylaw. Many of you here were there to help pass and make that monumental decision. Now, over 85 towns and cities in Massachusetts are on the movement, and that number is only growing. I think it's time that Shrewsbury becomes the 30th town to ban polystyrene, and hop on the bandwagon now as we continue to grow this movement across the state as other towns and cities continue to grow and pass similar bylaws.
In closing, What I want to say is we all want to live in a healthy and prosperous community. Styrofoam ban is sweeping across the nation. Roughly 200 cities, as these boys have explained to you, have already gone through that styrofoam ban, and more are in progress. More and more are happening. What we have to think is a pleasure for a few seconds or few minutes cannot cost us our health, should not be at the cost of our health and choices we make for our next generation. I think we do appreciate all of you are doing a selfless service, so I think there's an appreciation from all of us. We hope, and we hope that you actually support this because it is the right thing for Shrewsbury to be doing. With that, I think our formal presentation is over, and we stuck to our time, unlike last time, and kind of hand it over back to you.
Okay. Thank you very much, all of you, and let's all remember that phrase, if Lee can do it, we can do it. I'm going to be seeing the moderator from the town of Lee this Friday at the annual meeting of the Massachusetts Moderators Association, and when I tell him this story, I bet he'll say to me, you know, no one has ever said that about the town of Lee before. It's a town of about 5,900 people, so I'm sure that will make his day. Folks, just for your reference, there are two handouts or additional materials that I'm not sure if they've both been made available to you. One is an information sheet from the Shrewsbury Public Schools. Was that one of the handouts tonight at the desk? Sign-in desk, yes. Information on potential impact of ban on the school system. And the second is a letter from the Board of Health dated October 7th, a letter addressed to the Board of Selectmen. I'm not sure if that was sent with the materials or if you've had access to it online or otherwise, but it is a letter to inform the Board of Selectmen that the Board of Health held a hearing at its June 22nd, 2018 meeting to discuss the issues raised at the May 4th, at its May 4th meeting regarding what was then Article 14, the previous proposed polystyrene article. And but this letter was to inform that after several meetings with the proponents between then and now, at the Board of Health's meeting on September 26, 2018, the board voted unanimously to recommend passage of this article at the October 22nd special town meeting. So, for your information. Questions or comments with respect to Article 8? In front of Mrs. Nichols. Can't see the gentleman there.
Hi, Jeff Manning, Precinct 9. I encourage everyone to vote yes on this for a much healthier town. And we're having our youth be our leaders here. And I think we let our youth down if we did not sign off on this. And encourage everyone to vote yes. Thank you.
Further questions or comments? Mr. Lukacs?
John Lukacs, Precinct 2. Wasn't planning on commenting on this article tonight, but then I looked at the second page of what the Shrewsbury Public Schools sent out, and I noticed that on that back page, they make some statements that I believe are factual that contradict some of the statements you have made either tonight or at the town meeting last May about the safety of styrofoam trays, the fact that they may contain some hazardous materials when they're heated. That's one example. There are other examples in here, which makes me wonder whether some of the facts you've presented tonight are accurate as well. It's nice to throw these numbers out and say 2 million this, that goes around the world this many times, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But those are anecdotal and really don't provide a firm basis for making a decision like this. And I guess the only other comment I would make is that I have a problem with people imposing new mandates on other people unless there is a demonstrated factual basis for the need to do something like that. You claim there are health problems with the styrofoam. You have not proven that there wouldn't be health problems with other products used to replace styrofoam. Even here, when we talk about CO2 emissions, the school article says something about the fact that there would be CO2 emission from from any other wood-type products that would replace the styrofoam. There's a whole range of things that can be challenged in what you're proposing, and I think it's premature to do this unless we get more factual background information on all the comments you've been making tonight. Thank you.
Response, Mr. Razdan?
So I think there was an assertion made kind of that the studies are based off, like that the studies we talk about specifically on things like carcinogenic risk and all of that aren't based in fact. However, we can show you the studies that have been made. For example, there was a study made in Denmark that used 70,000 people as a sample and found that there was a 2.5 times increase in the amount of leukemia found and a 5 times increase in the amount of nasal cancer, specifically due to exposure to styrene. And they compared people who had more exposure to like the chemical, specifically styrene. Now, we agree that even if CO2, and even if we never move to a compostable system, CO2 may still be a problem. But uniquely, styrofoam has the problem where we have this chemical styrene, which the National Toxicology Program has said is reasonably considered a carcinogen, that we're putting into the food into the trays that are serving food to our children, as well as into the incinerator that then goes into the sky and goes into our air and pollutes our area. Specifically, the International Agency for Cancer Research also upgraded styrene from a possible human carcinogen to a probable human carcinogen in 2018 due to a number of new pieces of research that they found and a number of studies from across the world that they compiled. We think that all of these studies and all of this different evidence is extremely concerning because right now we're seeing that people are realizing that there's a serious harm to styrene. And I don't think we can just ignore that based off one claim when all of the evidence shows that it is a real risk.
Further questions or comments? Dr. Sawyer.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. As superintendent, I'm very proud of these young men in terms of the way they presented both last spring and this evening, the work that they've done.
Whoops. Please, folks, hold your comments.
And one of the goals we have as a school district is to try to provide more opportunities for our students, particularly our students at the middle and the high school levels, to have more real-world learning experiences, project-based learning, and this is an outstanding example of that. This is much more real than any school project. That said, and this is what they experience with their educators at school, they certainly can handle constructive criticism, and they can certainly handle respectful disagreement. And I think it's important after that exchange to reference the handout that you did receive on the way in this evening. Obviously, when this was discussed last spring, we felt it was incumbent upon us as a school district to look again at our use of polystyrene products, review the research that had been referenced, and make sure that we were in a situation where we were certainly not providing anything to our students that would be causing them any health concerns or harm. Number one piece on the handout references the fact that the Food and Drug Administration administers anything that comes into contact with food, including polystyrene or styrofoam trays or other packaging. We recently contacted them again, and they did affirm that all of their perspective and research, which includes all the different government research from the National Institutes of Health or the group that was referenced earlier, is that for this purpose, it is indeed safe. If you look at the government websites that talk about the finding that it is a probable carcinogen, it references studies, and I'm not familiar with the Denmark study, but it does reference studies that indicate they were looking at exposure for those workers in manufacturing styrene, not for those who come into contact with it through food. And I think that it stands to reason that the government wouldn't be saying with one hand that this is causing cancer through food contact and then go on approving it for use, whether that's in your coffee cup or whether that's in a tray in a school cafeteria. In terms of what it did say, it says, how do you protect yourself from it? It says avoid tobacco smoke where it's included. And the one I was interested in, home copiers. The off-gassing of home copiers actually contains it, and it said to make sure they're well ventilated. The government's recommendation was not to cease using it as far as school lunches and meals and so forth. As far as the incineration piece, and as number 4 indicates, we're not environmental experts. We did contact Wheelabrator. They indicate that their process, as is described in detail on the handout, It does scrub any other emissions other than carbon dioxide and water from the emissions. So we are confident, based on what they're telling us, and they're governed, of course, by the Environmental Protection Agency, that the incineration of the trays that we do have in the waste stream is not causing harmful chemicals to be released into the air or into the environment. But as is cited, this is one thing too that you need to weigh as you debate this issue, is that whether or not, because replacement products would actually create more carbon dioxide, and what is that difference in terms of the overall environmental impact on what choice we make as a community. The school committee has not taken a stance on this. This goes far beyond the school department. We felt it was important for you to have what we understand to be the facts relative to health risks, relative to how we might be working through these things. Our food services did remove some products that they felt they could do. Frankly, it was somewhat reading the writing on the wall that we're moving in a direction as a society away from these products. But in terms of, it is not, in our estimation or based on any research we've been able to do, it is not causing harm to our students by using styrofoam trays in our food service program. So I just wanted to make sure that you understood that that's our perspective as a school department. Thank you.
Are there further questions or comments with respect to Article 8? Mr. Lapamardo.
Thank you. Mike Lapamardo, Precinct 6. A couple of comments. First of all, again, I'd like to commend the students on their passion in putting this forward. However, I don't find myself that often agreeing with Mr. Lukash, but in this case, I think I have to. A lot of this has to do with the process that's been involved here. We saw some great presentations with some great slides. We didn't see anything from anybody. There's no public hearing. This is it. And we've got a small body of people here who represent less than 1% of the town that are going to be deciding on these types of issues. I'm not necessarily against this because I think the substitutes in this case are much more convenient and much more available than were the substitutes in the bag ban, which has just turned out to be a pain for a lot of people. However, I just think this process in banning things, because the pictures you showed, for example, of the styrofoam cups being littered, that's behavior. And whether they're paper, whether they're plastic, whether they're styrofoam, people who are going to do that are going to do that, and they're idiots, and you're not going to change that behavior. So, it's going to be something that's going to be littering your space because those people are just going to do it, period. But I think we just need to be careful as a body here that we don't get ourselves involved in trying to legislate people's behavior. Again, Dr. Sawyer indicated that the health risks are not quite as severe as your studies indicated. But wherever you have statistics, there are always competing statistics that could represent the other side. And we as a body have never really been able to hear those statistics. And obviously, you're trying to put across your point, so you're not going to give us the other side. But I think as a body, we need to make sure we're well informed before making these decisions, and we understand both sides of the argument. The number of cities that has done it is 29, but great, that's out of 351. The number of states that did it, I didn't count them, but one thing I'll say is if California's doing it, it's probably something I don't want to do, but that's another whole story. So that's my comments, thank you.
Mr. Razdan.
One comment on that. I think we went through all the processes in town. There was open board meeting with Board of Health, Board of Selectmen, as well as a Finance Committee. I'm not sure what other things we would have done. We have provided all the data. We have a lot of the research. If you wanted to share, I think we can send it to all town members. I think obviously this has been going for a year, and we have done. These kids can do a PhD. There's always two sides of the story, to be honest. And but I think it is very compelling story in terms of what people are doing. They wouldn't just be doing because somebody is telling them. New York has done that. I think we talked about San Francisco has done it. A lot of places are doing it. Yes, this is a lot of times. I think even some cases I challenge FDA. FDA till yesterday was saying cholesterol is not a problem, and now they're taking it. So the research emerges. I think what we have to say is what is the leading hypothesis right now, and I think we will prove it over a period of time.
Further questions or comments with respect to Article 6, Mrs. McGee? Article 8, excuse me.
Melanie McGee, Precinct 5. I think we are in over our heads in trying to decide a scientific matter. We are not qualified. The people in this room are not organic chemists or epidemiologists. I haven't heard anything that convinces me that this is a carcinogenic product. I just don't think we're able to do this. I don't even think our Board of Health is up to doing this. In fact, if there's someone in the room from the Board of Health, I'd like to hear what kind of research they did on this, so that we know for sure what we're talking about.
Further questions or comments? Mr. Gooley.
Bill Gooley, Precinct 8. Did I just turn it off? No. I think we have two different issues here. One is whether or not we're dealing with a health problem, whether or not styrofoam is carcinogenic to humans in the way that it's currently being used. And the other is an environmental problem. I think the environmental aspect of it is pretty clear, and it's clear not just from the wonderful presentations these young men made, but research that's going on all over the world. And I think that's the basis on which we ought to judge it. If we are going to start arguing science, frankly, I would trust these four gentlemen before I would trust the current EPA or FDA, who seem to be scientifically challenged, shall we say. But I don't think that's really where we ought to be going. I think we need to look at this as an environmental issue. And although I agree with John Lukács that I don't like banning things all the time, there are certain things that just have to stop. And it turns out that the wonderful world of plastics that was brought to us over the last 30 or 40 years, beginning with The Graduate, you may remember, has a downside that we're just starting to see. And I think styrofoam is one of those downsides. And by the time the government gets around to saying, oh, gee, it is carcinogenic, we'll all be dead of cancer. Thank you.
Further questions or comments with respect to Article 6? Yes, ma'am, behind Mrs. Boucher.
Hi, Shannon Wall, Precinct 7. I know there's really a large amount of support for this in our last meeting, and you've done a great job at addressing those concerns. Just wanted to express that it seems with this article, we with little effort can have big impact on our recycling and our town and the beautification of it as well, and just wanted to encourage everybody to support it.
Further questions or comments? Mrs. Swydan.
Carol Swydan, Precinct 6. I'd like to ask a related question. One thing that always bothered me about styrofoam is that we can't recycle it here in Shrewsbury, and I'd like to know why we can't do that, and that may be an alternative.
Response? Someone from the town? Mr. Razdan, you want to try that? But I might ask someone from town government to pipe in.
I think that's a great question. What has been found, it is not economically viable. There used to be some people to do that. It's not anymore economically viable, so it has actually been stopped because the amount of money it takes to styrofoam. I think China has stopped to take it. I think that's one of the things I heard, and town is not recycling it anymore.
Also, expanded polystyrene has about 95% air, and that just makes it extremely uneconomical for the transportation costs. So as a result, it is extremely uneconomical to actually recycle.
And adding on to that, actually, if we do switch to biodegradable alternatives, for example, you could see options down the line, such as like composting, which would be far better than just incinerating the styrofoam like we do now. So that's also something to think about.
Mr. Mizikar?
The town is limited in its recycling program, as you've probably seen over the past year or so, and both driven by the market and what's allowable to be collected at the curbside and processed by the materials recovery facilities that we use. And unfortunately, we cannot collect styrofoam at the curb right now. Further, there are some communities that certainly do, but I would say that the materials that you're discussing, which are food container products, would not be able to be recycled regardless. So you may see communities that recycle pure white styrofoam that a TV may be packaged in, but certainly not a container that chicken tenders came home from the restaurant in, because they're contaminated with other oils and stuff. So I don't see a comparison between those two uses of styrofoam.
Further questions or comments? Mrs. Delgado?
I first would like to say thank you for all the work that you've put in, for your passion, your dedication, and I support Article 8.
Further questions or comments regarding Article 8? Mr. Collins?
Hi, Peter Collins, Precinct 4. Again, I want to shout out to my boys over here. They did a great job. You know, a couple things. One, for the environmental impact, I totally agree that this would probably be better not to have styrofoam. I can say of the cleanups we do on Lake Winsigamen, major problem. There's bait cups and mostly Dunkin' Donuts coffee cups all over the lake. You see a large amount of, especially after events on the lake, so it would be best. And I, you know, as far as legislating behavior, almost every law in existence is a measure to legislate behavior. So they make things illegal because people won't not do them if you don't make it illegal a lot of times. On the study, I agree with Mrs. McGee that it's, you know, it's hard for us because we're not experts on things, but to put this in historical context of these kind of arguments, if this were the 50s and the early 60s and we were having a debate about smoking cigarettes or using asbestos tiles in construction of public buildings, we'd just be sitting here saying, well, there's not a lot of evidence to say that asbestos tiles are a bad thing. And, you know, now we're actually using that as a reason to replace schools. And certainly smoking cigarettes, if you'd done the research back then, there would be no evidence. And, you know, the tobacco companies would tell you right now that there's no evidence that, you know, it causes cancer. So, you know, and also from the states that have done this, I don't know, Mike, is Texas? They're not a bunch of tree huggers down there, right? So if Texas can do it, we can do it. So please vote yes on this. Thank you.
Further questions or comments with regard to Article 8? Yes, sir, in the back in the maroon sweater.
Don Hutchins, Precinct 10. We've heard a lot of conflicting information here. I'd like to bring the question back to the school department. The original, when this issue was originally brought up, it was a problem with the food in the schools. I think that the school department and the school committee are the ones who should decide what goes into the school budget and not be forced into it by a vote in the town meeting. There's always a choice for the students. If they feel strongly about the polystyrene, they just avoid the food in the cafeteria and bring their lunch. So those are two very basic things that at the school department. Another issue, or another question would be, Dr. Sawyer referenced the Food and Drug Administration on the federal level. I'm wondering if they have also contacted the State Department of Health or Environmental Affairs to get their opinions as to whether that's consistent with the Food and Drug Administration. And also, one other question: if the school department is, we've heard some options that were offered, but I'm wondering what the school department considers the most viable option if they do have to make a change from the Styrofoam. Thank you.
Are there response? Mr. Palish, School Committee Chair Palish.
Good evening, town meeting members. Jason Palish. I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 8, but I'm also the chairperson of the Shrewsbury School Committee. We do have a memorandum that was prepared tonight by the superintendent and the assistant superintendent for business services regarding the impact on the school department in terms of cost to switching to alternatives and some other things. I do want to be very clear on behalf of the school committee. The school committee does not have a policy position on this issue. This was discussed by the school committee at a workshop last week. There was a difference of opinion. School committee members, all 5 of us, are individually elected town meeting members from our own precincts. The school committee members will be voting as individuals on this article tonight in accordance with their own conscience and beliefs. Any factual questions about impact on the school department can certainly be directed to the superintendent and the assistant superintendent. Most of that information has been provided on the one-page memo that town meeting members were provided upon entry this evening.
Further questions or comments? Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Vikram Chabra, Precinct 7. Even though we don't have any conclusive evidence on many of the things that were mentioned today, one thing that is definitely known is that Styrofoam takes over 500 plus years to degrade on its own. A lot of this Styrofoam and all these plastics do find their way into our waterways, into our forests, and no matter how much we may try to change the behavior of people. And on this planet, we share this planet with millions of other living organisms, which may not be as intelligent as us humans, but they do consume that stuff, and it does affect their lives. So I personally feel, as members not only of this town, but as citizens of the planet, we should basically take that into consideration. Thank you.
Further questions or comments? Yes, sir.
Stephen Hess, Precinct 8. I move the question.
Okay, a motion. Did I hear a second? Okay, a motion for the previous question has been made and seconded. This is a motion to end debate on Article 8. This motion is not debatable and must be voted on immediately. So just to recap, a vote in favor of the motion for the previous question is a motion for to end debate on the discussion of Article 8 and proceed to an immediate vote. A no vote on this motion is a vote to continue the discussion of Article 8. This motion requires a 2/3 majority to pass. We'll try a voice vote first in accordance with our bylaws. Would all those in favor of the motion to end debate on Article 8 please signify by saying aye. All those opposed, please signify by saying no. And the motion passes by a 2/3 vote. So we will now proceed to an immediate vote on the motion under Article 8. This motion requires a majority vote to pass. Would all those in favor of the printed motion under Article 8 please signify by saying aye. All those opposed, please signify by saying no. And the motion passes by a majority vote. Article